Welcome back, everybody. You know where you're at? You're at the Solomon Project. You know the deal, right? For those of you who've been here before, y'all know the deal. But what about the new subscribers? Do you know what the deal is? The deal is this. It's not how much you make. It's how much you keep that counts. Super duper shout out from me, Richard Burns, to the Slime Pack Nation. I was privileged and very grateful that Slime Pack posted my video on her channel. Very grateful. Also, members of the Slime Pack Nation actually came and gave me support and continue to give me support. That is amazing, guys. You have no idea how grateful I am about that. You really don't. I'm extremely grateful, and I'm extremely grateful for Jasmine putting on my video. I want to touch on a subject that's near and dear to every trucker out there. That is diesel prices. And all you car drivers are right along there with this presentation on the fuel prices and the gas prices. Before we get to the actual pricing and why it's priced the way it is, I gotta preface this with something, because there's a political aspect to it. Yes, there is. Maybe not what you think it is, but it's there. There is a political aspect to the whole situation with the pricing of gas and diesel. Before I go there, there's some things that you would need to know. When this government was created, I was just a little boy. So we're talking, what, 1789 or something like that? I don't remember the exact year. I was a little kid, so I don't remember. The founding fathers got together, created the government. Now, who used to vote when the country was first, or when the government was first created? Who voted? The only people that voted back then were white men that were property owners. So if you were a white man and didn't own property, you weren't voting. Now today, the people that can vote has expanded. So gender is no longer an issue. Gene pool is no longer an issue. What do I mean by gene pool? Well, people like to use the term race. I like to use the term gene pool because it's more accurate. There's only one race, and that's the human race. And why some of us look different from others has to do with the fact that groups of people wound up migrating to different areas of the world, and groups were isolated from one another, and due to that isolation, there was a higher concentration on certain features like skin color, nose, ears, height, eye color, hair texture, hair color. All these things wound up concentrating due to this isolation. So there's really only one race. It's just different gene pools. Now that we got that out of the way, today our voting or our political process is much more inclusive now than it was when the founding fathers started this government. So there was an evolution. What caused that evolution in the voting process? Well, social political pressure caused the changes. There were arguments, debates as to who can vote for the sake of someone or some group that wanted to be able to win an election. They weren't winning with just the white males who own property, so let's include white males that don't own property. That way, our party stands a chance. And it continued to evolve probably in that same manner. And now today we have a much more inclusive voter population. Just like our voting population changed, increased, expanded, so were the changes in how government operated with our society. So there were things that the government stayed away from when it was initially created, but that evolved with time. Why? Well, social political pressure as well. This government, this country, it operates on a very fine line, an extremely fine line, and it's very difficult to manage the type of political system that we have. Very, very difficult, because it's like scripture. You can read scripture from beginning to end, but there are going to be so many different interpretations. Hence the reason why there's so many different denominations. And I'm just talking within the Judeo-Christian religion. I'm not even including the other religions in this debate, or if there were a debate. Now, the way our country operates, again, it operates on a very fine, razor thin line. This is a democratic republic democracy. Is that redundant? Democratic Republican democracy? That might be redundant. Anyway, this is a democratic Republican Democratic Republic. Sorry, Democratic Republic. Let me get that right. And the economic system that we have is a capitalist system. This is not socialist, and I don't think communism exists, because communism can't function in large numbers like a country or a nation. I know the word gets thrown around all the time, but they're not communists. They're actually authoritarian governments, dictatorships, and that term communism is assigned to these places, but they're not communist. Look it up. Read up Karl Marx, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, what does this have to do with gas and the price of gas? Well, this is where things are governed along a very razor sharp line. Let's go back to the late 1800s, where industry was booming. Factories were booming. This is after the Civil War. And the Industrial Revolution took over. Lots of new industry were popping up. Now, these industries, these companies that are in these industries, allowed for individuals to amass a large sum of money. Large sum of money led to a large amount of power. And like anywhere else, like anything else within our society, you always have those bootlickers that did anything and everything to please whoever was above them as far as the hierarchy within a company is concerned. So you got the bootlickers. The bootlickers tend to go out into the employed and justify every decision that their supervisors make. Even if the supervisor was taking absolute advantage of the workforce, the bootlickers used to go out there and argue that they were wrong, that the business owner is always right. I mean, look, you don't have the money that the business owner has. Okay, well, how did the business owner get that money? Through their workforce. But you're not going to get paid a whole hell of a lot. Yeah, you're one of the main components in their in the owner of the corporation or the company acquiring the wealth that they have, but you're only getting a crumb, if that. Fine. Did we get to the oil yet? We're getting there. We're getting there. So the oil industry, or the beginning of the oil industry, started in Pennsylvania, in Titusville, Pennsylvania, where in 1865, I forget the gentleman's name, he wanted to start a kerosene company. And in Titusville, there's a lake, and on the lake you can see this greasy stuff on the surface of the lake. So he wanted to capture all that, but he also thought of digging to try to find more. And it's a crazy story because he and three other investors, I think it was three other investors, got together, laid out the money for all the equipment necessary for this guy to dig and find more oil until there was no more money. There was no more money. And they told him, listen, just stop. We ain't got no more money. We can't continue to dig. Let it go. Guy said, okay, one last time. And sure enough, that last time, boom, and that's all she wrote. Later on, maybe 18 years later or something like that, we had a personality named David Rockefeller, or John Rockefeller, I forget which Rockefeller his name was, but the granddaddy of the Rockefeller Empire had two business partners. I think he bought both of them out, or one of them quit and he bought one out. Don't remember exactly how it went down, but he took over the business. He was a distributor, oil distributor, had a secret meeting with Carnegie, who had control over the railway system, or one of the people that had control over the railway systems. And secretly, decided that, well, he was going to transport oil by way of train, which was a much larger amount of oil that his competitors were able to transport. As a result, he was able to lower the price of the oil he was distributing. And what happened to his competitors? They got wiped out. So now we got Rockefeller as the only game in town. What do you call that when you're the only game in town in a business? It's called a monopoly. So the government said, hold on a second. Now, why would the government do that? Well, because you will get more money and have so much power as a monopoly, especially for oil. Especially for oil. You can become a dictator or a monarch. We just left that. We're not trying to have a dictator. We're not trying to go back to a monarchy. So, of course, those angry competitors that he had, of course, they still had money, still had some influence. They're still going to put pressure, social political pressure, to make sure that this dude doesn't get away with becoming a monopoly. Sure enough, laws were in place to put a stop to Mr. Rockefeller. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. He had to break up, what was the name of that company? Standard Oil. He had to break that thing up. Break it up. Cut it out, Mr. Rockefeller. Break that thing up. And so it happened. It was broken up. Now, that's a moment where the government, it can be perceived this way, that the government stepped in to protect the citizens, because the citizens are the consumers. Or other big shots said, you know what? This guy is jeopardizing us, other business owners. Put an end to that. And so it happened. This little detail might be important. I'll figure it out later on. But companies used to abuse their workforce. Straight up. They straight up used to abuse their workforce. If they can hire a child, 8 years old, that can do the job, they'll hire him because they don't have to pay him much. Pennies. If it was in amounts associated with today's pay, they could probably get away with paying a child 50 cents a day. And that was happening. There were foundries here in the United States where they were hiring child labor. But some of these kids were either perishing from industrial accidents or being maimed, losing an arm, a leg, something, or both. Who came to the rescue? Who came up with child labor laws? The government did. Other corporations didn't step in and say, whoa, to the founders, whoa, what are you doing? No. Other corporations are looking at the advantages of having a workforce that could get paid so little. You could work them 16 hours and pay them 50 cents. I'm talking about today's money, which sounds ridiculous. Yeah, it sounds ridiculous. But do you think for 1 second that a corporation wouldn't want to do that? So again, who comes to the rescue? The only entity that has the resources to be able to fight that. Where do they get the money from? Where does the government get the money from to be able to fight these people? Taxes. So you've got money coming in from corporations, from individuals who pay income tax, and they're all contributed to this thing that gives the government enough power to fight against that. Now, whether or not they're really doing it for the population, for the citizens or not, that could be debated. That could be debated. But that was the outcome. So these kids were no longer allowed to work until they hit a certain age, and then they had to get paperwork. I remember when I was 13, I had to get working papers in order to be able to get hired so I can work. But of course, there are some limitations, some restrictions associated with those working papers. But we're going to stick to the diesel and the gas prices. Okay. Now we know that we have an entity that will step in and put a stop to either some form of abuse against the citizenry or some way of preventing a corporation or a business owner to acquire so much power that they're the only game in town and they establish a dictatorship or a monarchy. We got that. We got that. Let's fast forward to the Jimmy Carter administration. We're talking about the 70s. This was after Ford. Because Nixon, he stepped down. Ford took over. He was the vice president. Ford lasted, 2 years. Lost the election, and then Jimmy Carter became the president. While Jimmy Carter was the president, something jumped off in the Middle East. Again. The Israeli government defended itself, but the Saudis didn't like the way it was handled. Didn't like the way it went down. They didn't like the U.S. government's position and how they handled the situation. So they went ahead, the Saudis, along with other nations that got together and formed this cartel called OPEC. OPEC is an acronym that stands for Oil Producing Exporting Countries. That's what it stands for. And they're the ones that influence the price of oil. Yes, they influence the price of oil throughout the world. Not the U.S. government. Not Biden. OPEC does, led by Saudi Arabia. And I'm checking right now just to see how many countries are in OPEC. 12 countries. 12 countries. 5 of them are in the Middle East, 6 are in Africa, and 1 in South America. South America. Now, there are other countries that are not a part of OPEC that also produce oil. And they also... Okay, so I got the list right here. Algeria, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela. Now, there have been member countries that have stepped off or have been included, but those are the members now. Algeria, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, by the way, that's considered a Latin country. Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Libya, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela, y'all. Oh, Qatar was in there. Algeria was in there. Angola was in there. Ecuador was in there. Trying to tell you. So these countries get together and decide whether they're going to ramp up production or scale back from production. Now, what does that mean when they do that? Well, in the mid-70s, when Jimmy Carter was in office, they decided to not even scale back. They sanctioned the U.S. and refused to sell them oil. Oils. They refused to sell them oil. Anybody who was alive at that time can remember, if they were old enough to remember, the super... My apologies. Camera got hot and shut off on me. That's okay. We're taking care of that. We got a fan blowing right on it. Probably heard it on the mic while I got close to the camera. In any event, I'm going to go back and repeat what happened. So during the Jimmy Carter administration, OPEC decided to sanction the U.S. and not sell them any oil. Or maybe there was a tremendous reduction in the amount of oil. Whatever the case was, it was creating a terrible hit on the U.S. economy. Oil equals energy, which is extremely important for nations throughout the world. There might be some exceptions to some countries or to some pockets of some countries where people live a very simple life. Like the Khoisan in... What part of Africa is that? They don't use electricity of any kind. But most developed and developing nations, they need oil. They need oil for energy. So it's very important. It's a very important commodity. Well, that was a terrible moment that U.S. citizens were going through because gas was not available in the amounts that people were used to having them. So there were restrictions placed on gas stations, and as a result there were these tremendously long lines at the gas stations. Okay, that hurt. However, after that, the U.S. government learned its lesson. There was a discovery, and this discovery helped create this independence of OPEC and their leverage and their pressure. It's called fracking. What the frack, y'all? It's called fracking. So now with this new technology, we were able to access tremendous amounts of oil. Tremendous. The main area of the country where a lot of this oil is found is called the Permian Basin. That's all up and down Texas. And you have corporations that dedicate themselves to producing oil primarily from the Permian Basin, although there are other states that have some good supplies of oil. The Permian Basin. Now, what did that do? Now the United States can tell OPEC to go kick rocks. You can imagine that OPEC was not too pleased with that. Now the U.S. is independent. What you got to say now, OPEC? Huh? You want to try to pull a stunt like that again? Don't think for 1 second that OPEC didn't realize how they can impact a country's political system. Huh? Don't think for 1 second that they didn't realize that they could put pressure on countries who purchase their oil, their energy, in order to put pressure on one candidate or another. Ooh. Think about that. So between 2014 and 2016, they got into a price war with the United States. Now, the oil that's being produced in the United States isn't just enough for us to sustain ourselves, but it's also enough to compete in the global market. So the Saudis are saying, hold up, man. We got to do something about this because we're slipping. We're losing power. We got to get our power back. We're going to continue to produce more oil in the United States. And the United States said, so what? We got this. They started producing too, large amounts. It started a price war. Of course, the demand is the same. No change in the demand, but there's a lot more supply out there. So what's going to happen to the price? It's going to go down. So the price kept going down and down and down. Well, yeah, the consumer's happy about that because they're paying less at the pump. That's fantastic. However, this price war caused a very serious problem in our banking industry. How? Well, a lot of these companies that were fracking up because the price of the oil that they were extracting was not enough to pay their debt to the bank and to remain viable as a business. So they had to fire bunches of people and go into bankruptcy. No woo. No woo. No. That's bad. Crazy, right? You're over here thinking, wow, yeah, this price war is making it better for my pocket. But overall, it's doing more harm that we'll see later on. Not immediately. Right now, you're enjoying this low price. But you don't see the storm that's coming because of that. Well, tell you what. The OPEC nations had representatives that were meeting with CEOs from oil producing corporations from here, the United States. I'm going to see if I can find the name of that particular meeting that they were having. Yeah, here it is. It's called CERAWeek. CERAWeek. These were a series of meetings that these CEOs were having with Saudi Arabia and members of the other nations that are a part of OPEC. And they developed a love affair. Oh, we have so much in common. Why are we doing this? Let's stop this. Okay, so they stopped. No more price war. Let's cut down on production. Increase the price of oil. By the way, this meeting was taking place around 2017. Just so that you know. It's important that you know. 2017. All right. Cool. Cool. Okay. Let me see, because I got some notes here. Some important notes. Okay. So, after that, COVID hit. We all know what happened when COVID hit. Everything got shut down. Everything got shut down. Goods were still being moved because people were ordering online, right? That's when the truckers started going crazy. That's when new companies started being created, small companies. That's when truckers were telling their friends, you need to buy a truck and you need to do this because there's so much money. Not considering that this was a result of a black swan event. Okay? Not even considering that. So I'm looking over my notes. Right, so COVID hit. And the only thing that was really moving were trucks. But that didn't represent an increase in demand because people weren't traveling around. They weren't using their cars. They weren't buying gasoline. So there was a reduction in demand. What happens when there's a reduction in demand? The price drops. So here we are. right? Here we are. 2021 comes along. We're off the lockdown. Big old crazy thing about people wearing masks and gloves and going crazy about it. Some people were perishing, some of which were relatives of mine that perished as a result. I caught the damn thing 3 times. The first time, I thought I was going to die. Literally thought I was going to die. I would have to get out the truck and walk, and after 2 steps, I was exhausted. When I had to crank the landing gear, forget it. I would go 1 full rotation and I had to stop and catch my breath. It was crazy. I never got sick like that in my life. I've gotten the flu. I've had the measles or the chickenpox, one of the two. Super high temperature, hallucinating, all that stuff, and it didn't even feel as bad as the COVID I got. The cosmic cooties. So 2021 came around. Demand started to increase. Okay, so we're gonna ramp up production, right? But out of nowhere, Russia decides to invade Ukraine. Russia is a major player in the global oil market. Even though they're not part of OPEC, they are a major player in the oil market. Remember, the U.S. does not dictate prices. OPEC dictates prices because they're the ones that's a cartel of countries, made up of countries that produce the most amount of oil for the globe. Okay. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, the price of oil skyrocketed. 120 something per gallon, per barrel. Something crazy. Because everybody was under the impression that this was going to impact the Russian production, and also access to oil was going to be tough, because then the United States government put sanctions on the Russians immediately. Well, that got resolved. And here's the crazy part. While these countries, and remember that OPEC and Russia at the time, they were cutting down production. OPEC was cutting down production with the hopes of sticking it to the U.S. Remember, they used that as leverage to impact different countries' political system or politics or whatever. So now that the barrel is way up in price, that's going to cause major inflation. A spokesperson from the U.S. government even accused Saudi Arabia of doing such. Of course, they denied it. But that's what went down. Okay, you want to play games. Cool. Russia gets sanctioned. And guess who starts to selling their oil reserves? The U.S. government has oil reserves, and they start selling. We're not talking about the companies that extract oil. We're talking about the government's reserve. They start selling it at that high price. And then when the price dropped, they started buying it back, replenished the reserves, made a profit, made enough money to keep government agencies afloat, operational at 100%. So there ain't gonna be no arguments about where we're gonna get the money from. No! Ain't gonna be no argument about that. The federal government made a profit. So all these government employees, your money's there. There should be no debate about where they're going to get the money in the budget for federal employees. Well, it's there because, and this happened to have happened during the Biden administration, Biden administration secured that money for federal employees, for federal programs, because that money goes back to the government. Okay? Right. So it doesn't go into any individual's pocket. This is where it gets interesting. So there's a personality from a oil producing corporation. Corporation is named Pioneer. The CEO is named Scott Sheffield. Pivotal person. Now, with so much drama with the oil, with the oils, and with everything that was happening, don't think for one second that while the federal government was selling its reserve, don't think for one second that the oil companies here in the United States weren't taking advantage of these high prices of oil. And let me tell you, they absolutely loved it. They loved it. Because their profit margins went through the roof. They loved it. They loved it so much that you don't like this. They loved it so much that that company Pioneer and Mr. Sheffield, they wanted to merge with ExxonMobil. Scott Sheffield wanted to be on ExxonMobil's board of directors. All right, cool. But when you're gonna merge, you got to produce some information to the Federal Trade Commission. What the hell do you need that for? Well, you want to make sure that this merger doesn't open up the pathway to a monopoly. Okay, so Federal Trade Commission is doing their investigation. Lina Khan was leading that investigation. Federal Trade Commission under the Biden administration. It's funny because while there were some people putting up stickers at the gas stations with Biden's face pointing to the gas price saying, I did that, Biden had nothing to do with that. Remember, here in this country, you can accuse anyone of anything. You can take it to court. Once you get to court, They're going to ask for the evidence. And if you ain't got the evidence, you just wasted our time. Now, what would something like the Federal Trade Commission look for? Well, red flags. Understand that these red flags can exist, but if it doesn't come to their attention, there's really nothing to respond to. It's like in the hood, where you got people selling pharmaceuticals illegally. You know what I'm talking about? And they go on for years and don't get caught. Why not? What they're doing is illegal. Cops drive around. They have an idea of who's who, what's what. But they don't get arrested because people aren't snitching and because there's no evidence gathered yet. They get it eventually, but in the meantime, and that's basically what happened with Pioneer and Mr. Sheffield. Mr. Sheffield wanted that merger. Okay, so Lina Khan did her job. Federal Trade Commission. It's there to protect the consumer. Yeah, they were doing some bugged out stuff, but that bugged out stuff was not going to be exposed until everything was asked for by Ms. Lina Khan under the Biden administration. Okay, I gotta check your stuff. Well, turns out that she discovered emails and text messages where Mr. Sheffield was coordinating with the Saudis and other OPEC nations, coordinating, colluding to dramatically cut down production to cause the oil prices to go up. What? Yeah, Ms. Lina Khan discovered that. And some of that information was referred to the Department of Justice to file criminal charges against parties like Mr. Sheffield that were engaging in that collusion. Yes, the Biden administration. So Biden wasn't the one playing games with the prices. It was collusion between some oil producing companies here in the United States. Wow. And OPEC. What a patriot those guys are, huh? Isn't that patriotic? Well, here's the thing, right? This is how they were justifying that. They figured, wow, the American consumer, they keep paying the higher prices, so let's rock! Okay. Well, that wasn't justifiable. Not as far as the Federal Trade Commission is concerned. Because you colluded. You were price fixing with other companies here in the United States and with our competitors, OPEC. Price fixing. That's illegal. Well, I'll tell you what. Some politicians, and this is where the politics comes in. Some politicians were trying to come to Mr. Sheffield and other oil producers. They were trying to come to their rescue. Yeah, they were trying to come to their rescue. 38 senators wrote a letter to Ms. Khan and told her to back off. Can you guess what party they were all from? They were all Republicans. I'm gonna put up the list. 38 senators wrote to Mrs. Khan and told her to back off. You could look for the letter online because it's available, but I'm gonna post the names of all the senators. Yeah. Were those senators looking out for us by telling her to back off when she was trying to protect the consumer? Really? And people will still vote for them. Some people have a nasty habit of voting against their own interests. It's just like that. Like the bootlickers. They will work against their own interests and the interest of their community just to shine. They want to shine. Shine on me. Ooh. Right. Okay. Well. But because it's an election year, there's tons of misinformation being put out there through all social media, the news, misinformation, or they just don't report it. Or maybe they do report it and it's in some little tiny corner in a newspaper all the way in the back, or somewhere in the middle, lost, caked up in there. Or maybe they make mention of it in the media at like 3:41 and 53 seconds a.m. while everybody's asleep, and they'll play that for like 36 seconds. Yeah. Now you know. You can verify what I said. Lina Khan from the Federal Trade Commission is putting the pressure on them, and 38 senators told her to back off. 38 Republican senators told her to back off. Oh, so you're gonna let us? You're trying to stop her from protecting us and getting these oil prices down, or getting these gas prices down. Just let them price gouge. And price gouging is behind, I'm not doing a video on that, but price gouging is behind the high food prices. Oh, what did you think it was? One major corporation behind that is Tyson. Oh, what did you think it was? Corporations. Remember, fine line, razor thin line, because this is a capitalist nation. And you got plenty of politicians that are saying, you know, we need less government, we need less oversight on these corporations. Less. Okay, well, you know what? Stay fresh out there. Keep it profitable. I'm gonna go for a ride with Kenny. I'll see you guys in the next one.
Arabamda aça, seviyorum çift kalem aça. Göremedi kimseden fayda. İşler